Do you ever start work on something and then just watch it grow and grow in size? I don't mean you procrastinate or you get distracted with it. I mean, you're really focused on it. But the size of it just keeps getting bigger and bigger the more you deal with it. And you start feeling people's attention on you because you said it would be some quick thing to do, but it just keeps growing with no end in sight. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about why that happens, why it's not your fault, and most of all, what you can do to get past it. Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Tom and I've been working as an IT consultant for the federal government for the last 18 years, and the last 6 of which I've been spending as an Agile coach. And what that means is that I work with software delivery teams and business partners and executives to understand how we can produce better software faster. In fact, that's the reason I wanted to become a coach in the first place, is honestly because of problems like we're talking about today. I would look around and see the way that my team was working and the problems that I and my coworkers were struggling with, and I'd always want to go find a better way for us to work. Is there something better that we could be doing? And being a coach is nice because it gives me that little bit of perspective and a little bit of distance from the rest of the team, which helps me to notice problems like we're talking about today. Not too long ago, I was called in to help with a team that was having this exact problem. Now, on paper, their output had stalled. Now, the team had started work on a single, simple user story, but the moment they started work on it, they realized that there was a lot more going on than what they initially thought. Originally, they were told that they had to build a pretty simple process. It goes from A to B to C, but they quickly realized that sometimes there would be variants of that path. Very quickly, they started documenting and then building all of these alternate paths. They would go from A to B2 and then to C, or C2, or they would even double back sometimes if something at a later stage happened in a particular way. And they started out with this nice, simple version of what was supposed to be done, but the moment they touched it with a stick, it sprawled into this massive undertaking that they had to deal with. And I realized pretty quickly that, yep, you've got yourself a magic grow capsule on your hands. Now what's that? It's one of those cheap little toys. You get these like at the carnival. They look like a little pill, and then you drop it in water and then it grows, it expands. When it touches the water, it opens up and it turns into like a dinosaur or a safari animal or a truck or a vehicle or something. Now the thing to remember about this kind of work is that work that was always there, just like with the magic grow capsule. It was always sitting inside the capsule. But no one knew it was there until they started actually engaging with it. Now, personally, I like to call this act discovery because you're not inventing anything. It's not like we're creating something new that wasn't there. It always was there. It was just squeezed into this tiny little package that didn't open up until you actually started interacting with it. Now, part of this was the way that the team was actually tracking the work. Every time they discovered one of these new use cases, one of these new paths that they had to design and build and test and everything, they would just update the scope of that first user story. They would just add, oh yeah, there's more to this. It's not just these 3 bullet points that we have to get done. There's more and more and more and more. But they would never increase the estimate of their work. It still looked like some small piece of work that was only supposed to take them a couple of days to get done. They were discovering lots and lots of new work that wasn't part of their initial estimate, but instead of creating new tickets to show all of these new situations, all of these new use cases that they were discovering as they built, they just kept piling their own misery into this one ticket, which from the outside, it just looked like they couldn't get this one simple bit of work done. You know, I had one client once, it was a different client, and I was helping a whole bunch of new teams, new Scrum teams, they were being stood up, and I talked with one of the Scrum Masters at one of the big quarterly planning exercises, and I said, well, how are the user stories this time? And he said, well, about half of them are good, and the other half are very poor. And I said, what's wrong with them? He said, they're empty. I said, what do you mean empty? He said, well, he showed me up, he clicked on it, and it opened up, and there was nothing there. There was no description, there were no acceptance criteria, there was just a title. In fact, a lot of the titles just had a sort of serial number to it. There was nothing there. They were told to do these and plan their work for the next several months, but there was just literally nothing there. But that's the thing, you see, when you're at a very low level of quality, it's obvious you need to spend a lot of time on it. In fact, that's what they did. They spent the next couple of days working really, really closely with their business partner and their product owner, figuring out what is this thing you wanted us to do? And they asked a ton of questions, and then they built those user stories out, so then when they had to deliver on them, they were able to get the work done. The problem with the Magic Grow capsule is, well, it's that space. It's that sort of middle, low, maybe lower middle space where at a glance, it looks good. Okay, a quick look at it, you think it's good, you think you can do it, you accept it, but in reality, it hasn't been defined well enough. We haven't captured all of the context, all of the scope, all of the things that you have to do for it. They're not there. But you've sort of been tricked into thinking that it's good until you start interacting with it. The problem is, on the surface, it looks good. Everything about it looks good. Nothing is obviously wrong with it. But they haven't done enough of that conversation. They haven't captured all of the context, all of the business rules, everything that you really need so that the work can just be done one time, the first time, the right way. And so you accept it, and it's not until you actually start doing it that you realize you've got a problem. So how do we make sure that we get all of that information so that we don't have this thing blow up in our faces? Well, let me tell you a story about another project, another team, another government client where we were building an application for users to submit approval paperwork. I won't give you the details because I shouldn't give you the details, but we had already understood the basic process of what we were going through. We had already built out all of the basic pages and the frameworks of them, and the UX was there. Like, a lot of stuff had been done. And then one day we have this user story, and this one user story is just that we're going to add a little more functionality to one of the pages. The users want to be able to attach a file to their paperwork before submitting it. Nice and simple, easy, understandable, low discovery, something we all know how to do, everybody understand, makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but the user story was great. It was really well thought out, it was really robust, there were acceptance criteria, they told us about how big the file size can be and the kind of file formats that can be allowed. They even gave us language on the page so we knew exactly what to put on the page. There were no questions about that. There was a file naming convention about what the files, the uploaded files, were going to look like once they got put on the cloud. Everything looked great, and the team estimated it at a nice, manageable 3 story points. Again, something that should only take 1 or 2 days to get done. And we were about to move on to go to the next story, and for some reason it suddenly occurred to me. I said, hey, what happens if there's an interruption with the file upload, or there's a failure with it? I mean, some of these files are really big, and people's internet can blink out. Have we taken that into account? And then the lead developer sat there, and he said, and that developer said, for like a good, solid 30 seconds. And at that point, I knew I had asked a good question. Because if he didn't have the answer off the top of his head, we should talk about this, because this is something we definitely needed to have figured out. And so he, our test lead, our engineer, our data architect, and our UI UX guy, they started having a conversation. And they talked for 30 minutes. Because no, we didn't have a clear picture about what would happen if a file upload was interrupted. But at the end of those 30 minutes, we didn't have a 3-point story anymore. No. We had a 5-point story, and then we had a 3-point story for one of the unhappy paths that the conversation had identified. And then we had another 3-point story. There was a research spike to determine how we would be able to clean out these partially uploaded files. And then behind that, there was another story, except this one had a question mark. People didn't even want to estimate what this was going to be, because depending on the results of that research spike, we would need to figure out how we could do this and whether or not we even had the tools on our client's enterprise environment to make it happen in the first place. And I was super glad that I asked that question. And not everyone wants to ask those kinds of questions. We're all in the meeting together. We want to get to the next thing. We're tired of talking about this. Sometimes we've talked about it too much. And we don't want to ask questions because we feel like, well, I'm just going to be making more work. But again, just like the story I told you about that first team and the whole Magic Growth Capsule in the first place, you're not inventing work by asking questions, by figuring out and getting a better idea of what this work is that you're going to do. You're not inventing work, you're discovering it. That work was always going to be there. This problem with the file upload, if we hadn't understood it right then, we would have figured it out later, and it might have been a little bit embarrassing, or we might have figured it out much later, closer to go live, and it could have delayed the go live, it could have delayed the project, which would have been more embarrassing. Or it could have made it into production. And if it made it in production, it would be even more embarrassing. Because one day we might just discover that we've been uploading these multi-gig, some of these files are very, very large, multi-gig uploads, these junk files that are just sitting on the cloud. And if you know anything about the cloud, here's the thing about it. In a professional environment, you pay for that. So we would have been uploading files all over the place and the government would have been getting billed for it. And at some point they would have realized, you guys are leaving a bunch of junk files on our cloud drive and we're having to pay Amazon for it. Again, all of these possibilities are way worse and way more embarrassing and more work for our team, because we would have built up more functionality on top of whatever it was that we were building all the way in the beginning, because we figured out in that one meeting what it was that we needed to do. Remember, the best time to discover the work that you need to do is early. So now that we know what the problem is, how do we fix it? So the first thing you can do, and I know this is my answer to everything, is education. Just educate yourself about this. Educate yourself, educate your coworkers, educate your team, educate your stakeholders, your partners, everybody. Spread the word about this. Maybe by sharing this video with them after you like and subscribe. Who's to say? Who's to say how you do it? But seriously, the benefit of this is it's pretty deep, right? Because the more people who know about this, the more people who are aware of it, that means the room is going to be more eager and more willing to have these kinds of conversations. The more that everybody agrees that, yes, it is good for us to have these conversations. It is good for us to ask these questions. It is good for us to, the assumption is that we should be having these conversations. We should be asking all these questions when work comes in. We should really be pushing it because we can figure these things out ahead of time and we can get ahead of our problems. The more people who know that, the more often you're going to find these things, the more often you're going to be able to figure it out on your own, and it's just going to create a better environment for everyone involved. Now, the second thing you're going to want to do, and again, you and your coworkers and everybody involved, you need to get in the habit a little bit more of asking these kinds of questions before you agree to do something. I've worked with so many people and so many teams, some of which were very, very experienced people. I'm not talking about like interns or someone who's never worked before and they think they're just supposed to do whatever their boss tells them to do. But I mean, I'm talking with people who've had decades of experience and they're just conditioned to take any work request that comes in. If it comes in this form, we're not supposed to ask a lot of questions. We're not supposed to have a conversation. I don't know if they got burned by a client in the past or someone yelled at them and said, you're supposed to just do what the client tells you to do. But whatever it is, you got to get out of that habit, okay? It's your job to know what it is that you're signing on for. And you need to start asking those kinds of questions before you accept responsibility for any kind of new work. Now, the problem with this whole magic grow capsule phenomena is that everybody thought this was a simple request. I'm not talking about somebody who knows that they're asking you to do something big and complicated, but they're lying to you about how big it is. Everybody thought all of these requests were small. They thought it was something simple. And it wasn't until you actually had to interact with it that you realized that there was all of this more work to get done. But I'll tell you, you need to get in the habit of asking these kinds of questions about what's being asked of you before you take on any new work. And then the last thing you can do is use this as an opportunity for a retrospective. Ask yourself or ask your team or get everybody together to figure out, how can we do better in the future? What are the kinds of things we should be asking the next time this happens? How can we improve the way we work? That's my whole thing that I do as an Agile coach. We try to help people work better on themselves. And what I would recommend doing in whatever way that you can have, whatever conversation you're going to have, if it's just you and you're examining your own life and your own things that you do, or if you're working with the team, there are two questions that you should ask yourself to figure out how you can do this stuff better in the future. You should ask yourself, what do I know now that I wish I knew when I first started working on this? And then you should ask yourself, if I could go back in time, what would I have asked so that I learned the thing that I wish I knew when I first started doing this? You see, with that first question, you'll have identified the gap in your knowledge that caused this problem in the first place. You've figured out the thing that, well, if only I had known this, I would have told them it's going to take weeks to get this done, not just a couple of days. Now, once you have that, you can zoom in on how you can get that information in the future so it doesn't happen again. By the way, when I say what would you have asked, I don't mean you should just ask what you should have asked. You should also be thinking about who you should ask and when in the process would be the earliest time that you could have gotten this information. And once you're armed with that knowledge, you can actually work on implementing a fix so that you're never surprised by it again. Now, if you're asking these questions of yourself or as part of a team retrospective, you're going to want to put some plans down for the future so that you actually ask these questions. I've had so many retrospectives, so many teams, they get together and they think about what they're going to do and they resolve to do all of these things. We're going to do all of these new things for ourselves and it's going to be great and we're going to really fix this problem. And then they leave the meeting and they just kind of forget, it kind of melts away. Now, if you're working alone, I would recommend writing this down in a journal or maybe in your personal knowledge bank. So the next time you go through this experience, you will have the reminder of what you want to ask. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing this more formally with a team at work, you might look at creating and updating some process documents that you and your teammates can improve based on what you've learned. You know, process documents are a whole other thing we could do a video on sometime. If you want, you could leave a comment below and we could talk about that. But they are a really, I find them an absolutely invaluable resource for teams. It's really simple. You just have it could even just be a text document, but it could be a Word document or just something you stick up in the room where you always have your meetings. And it's just a list of, look, this is the way we run our stand-up. This is the way we run our story planning session. This is the way we run sprint planning. This is the way we run any kind of meeting. We do it in a certain way, and there are questions that we always ask. And once you have that, well, then you can add more questions to it. You can have your session where you figure out, hey, we need to be asking things about, hey, what happens if the user story fails? What happens if, whatever it is that you come up in your meeting. And if you write those questions down in that process document, and then every time you have the meeting, you look at the process document and you're reminded to ask those questions and you're encouraged to ask those questions because everybody understands why we're asking these questions all the time, then you're going to discover stuff much, much earlier in the process and you're not going to have this work blow up in your face. You know, if you were getting really ambitious here, you could even take those questions and build some kind of intake form. So when work comes in the first place, people requesting work will be able to provide that information up front. You can even just take those questions and email them to stakeholders before the meeting so they know what you're going to ask, possibly even preventing a meeting from taking place in the first place because they provided everything you need ahead of time. The point here is that you need to make asking these questions a consistent part of your process. You need to always be asking them. You need to make it an integral part of the way that you do your work so that you can catch these kinds of things in the future earlier and earlier and prevent them from blowing up in your face. If you found this helpful, I would love it if you could leave a comment below. I would love to hear people's horror stories. That sounds bad, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I love hearing people give real-world accounts of when these things have happened. I would love to get those in the comments. Maybe we'll read them out in a future video. You know, if you want to learn more about changing the way that Scrum works for you might want to check out this video over here. Or if you are interested in finding out why celebrity mega streamer Thor Holt doesn't like Scrum at all and whether or not that means something for you, you can check this video out over here. Thanks so much.